Hey there, and welcome to the Confident Woman Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Brooks. Join me as I sit down and chat with co-hosts, friends, and carefully curated guests and talk about all the things that empower you to become your best and most confident self. So, let's get started. 7 years ago, I launched this podcast, The Confident Woman. And today I want to tell you the story of how it actually started, because I think over these years, I've shared bits and pieces of how everything kind of started, but never the full picture. And the full picture matters right now more than it ever has. And it's pretty wild as I look back and reflect and about everything and how God is just so good. He just brings things full circle. And so this week marks 7 years, 375 episodes, and a top 2% global ranking. And when I sit with all of that, what comes back to me again, just it's not the numbers, but it's a question. And one that I have been carrying probably all these years and didn't even really sit and think about it until probably as of late. And even as I was preparing to do something different and special for this particular episode. But this question I've been carrying is, did I do what I was supposed to do with this? Did I serve my gifts the way God intended? And did I show up to the calling the way I was called to? And while I still don't have all the answers, even probably a clean, simple, solid answer to any of those questions, that's something that I think that as I navigate this life, God will continue to show me and help me to bring peace to those questions and the answers from within. But what I do have is the story. This is the story, and I think it's one of the most honest and beautiful things that I know when I look back at how I could see God orchestrating and pulling everything together. But sometimes the hardest part of that is in this messy middle, right? This waiting period, this season of trusting. And when God pulls us out, we can look back and realize that He had been orchestrating this entire thing, whatever the thing is, the entire time. And it's so beautiful when we can look back and see this come full circle. And so this is the thing that I know about what trusting in God's plans actually looks like from the inside. So let me take you back to where it all started. Way back, 7 years ago in 2018, I had just wrapped up 6 years of my fitness competition. So as a former fitness competitor in the bodybuilding division, I had spent the last chapter of that journey that really had required everything of me and everything I had. And so somewhere on the other side of all of that, I found this new version of me. And it came from a lot of unpacking what I've learned so much in my growth and my journey to healing, fitness, and self love, which was all chronicled in my book, Chasing Perfection, was this newfound version of freedom. And it was a form of freedom that I truly have never, ever experienced before. And when I talk about this freedom is a quick backstory of why I got into fitness competitions was really because I had a terrible relationship with myself, my body, the reflection in the mirror. I did not have a loving, but rather a loathing relationship with myself. And when I came to the place of I needed to change, I needed to change something. And it was no longer about the pointing fingers and blame game, but I had to take ownership, accountability, and responsibility of my life. And so the very first place that I started was the thing that held me back, the thing that was always in my way. And it was the reflection. I did not like the woman in the mirror for a number of reasons. But physically speaking, I didn't like the reflection to which I saw myself. I didn't like the shape. I didn't like anything about what I looked like. And I know it might sound a little vain, but we start on what we can see. That's typically where we land. Our eyes see something we don't like and we go to fix it, but we realize it's a bigger issue rooted deeper within. And so when I found myself looking in this reflection of myself in the mirror, I didn't like it. So that ventured me on this journey to fitness. And fitness was a way for me to fix my body. It was a way for me to create muscles and shape and definition. It was a way for me to control and manipulate my body to become the thing that I wanted it to aesthetically look like and be. And that was done through exercise and nutrition. Now, as somebody who battled years and years of body dysmorphia, eating disorders, disordered eating, extreme diet, extreme exercise, I flipped the narrative and started using fitness and nutrition as a way to healthily control and manipulate my body. And that's what was done through bodybuilding competitions. And so, to save you the whole big long story, that's where I had found this freedom, because in my journey began this quest of healing, of fitness and self-love. And so this freedom on the other side was freedom from diets, freedom from eating habits and scarcity around food and the fear factors of what to eat, when to eat, how to eat, and a way to lovingly nourish and holistically feed and fuel my body from the inside out, which then what we put in becomes what we get out. And the body naturally became the byproduct of the inner healing. And so when I was doing this harmoniously in progression with the bodybuilding regimen that was required, because I had coaches and fitness coaches, nutrition coaches, posing coaches, all of that, I started to fall in love, not just with myself at the moment, but with the process. And the process, as it transpired and unfolded, I began to fall in love with this new woman I was becoming. And this was for the very first time in my life. Because, as I said, I did not have a loving relationship. I resented the woman in the mirror, the reflection, because I knew everything that that woman had gone through. I knew everything that she faced. I knew every fear she thought. I knew every secret she kept. I knew every bit of shame and guilt that she carried. And I knew so much of the trauma, the drama, the loss and grief and everything that she kept hidden and privately carrying her whole life. When I found this sense of freedom, it was this freedom that I'd never experienced before. And so in this whole journey, the freedom came from the release of shame. Freedom came from the release of sharing my secrets, letting them out, bringing them forth into the light, because that's where darkness has no power over you. When you can have people that you can confide in, share things with, and have safe spaces that you could talk through whatever you're carrying, that provides a sense of freedom and healing. And of course, with that darkness, there is no light, kills that darkness. And so nothing hidden in darkness can grow. So when we bring that to the light, freedom, growth, progression, and peace. And so again, those are the things that I write about in my book, Chasing Perfection. And for the first time in my entire life, I knew who I was and whose I was. And I was loving myself for the very first time. And this was this relationship that I was actually craving and longing for. But that wasn't something I could just acquire or something that I can get by doing more or hustling or proving or any of that externally. It was something that I had to create, cultivate, and nurture from within and rebuild from this loving place. I I tell you all this because I had to take you back to where it all started. That same year in 2018, I had my first public speaking engagement, and this was a very large stage, especially for a first time gig. And it was in LA. And to be honest with you, I was terrified. I knew about this for many months ahead of time. And I put it off to the side until the days were getting closer. The time was running out, and I would start getting anxious and getting nervous. And I kept telling myself, I'm flipping the script. I'm getting more excited than I am anxious. But the reality is, I've never done this. So there was that sense of, you haven't done it, so you're not going to be good at it. So you're probably going to suck. And then there's that fear factor, and we can go down this spiral, right? And so I was terrified. So even with everything that I had walked through, there was still this voice in my head asking, who are you to be up there? Who are you to be on the stage with these prestigious people that have accomplished and achieved so much more than you? These were the voices that my inner critic was telling me. But as I stepped into this anyway, I got up on stage And I had every right to be there. And I had to remember that I am worthy of taking up space. I am worthy of sharing my story. I am worthy of owning my power and my voice and using it for purpose. Because all of those things that I held within is what held me down and held me back. And so all of that came full circle. And this was the first time I got to leverage my skills and my strengths that I had been developing and sharpening in these dark seasons and share what God has called me to do and be. And when I got up there on the stage, as soon as I opened my mouth, the words literally just fell out. And it is surreal, to be honest, to tell you this, because I remember saying a little prayer before all of this, before I took the stage, and I said, God, I feel like I'm Moses. I feel like I'm tongue-tied. And even Moses argued and debated with God. And so when I asked the Lord in my prayer, I said, when I open my mouth, fill them with the words that you want me to speak. Let the Holy Spirit speak in and through me. And so, like I said, when I opened my mouth, they were not polished or perfected, but they were just real. And afterward, a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes and said, that's me. I too, when I look at myself in the mirror, I absolutely hate myself. And as much as that broke my heart for her, for me, I had so much love and compassion swallowing that same heart extended to her and to me. And it was a beautiful thing that we can watch this transformation be transformed in real time and knowing that we're gifting that to somebody else. And that was the moment that everything became so crystallized for me. I wanted to keep having these conversations, these real, raw, honest conversations about the things that real women carry privately but never say out loud unless someone is willing to go first. Those things that we think, the things that we feel, the things that we have experienced. And we think that what we go through in the darkness is meant to stay there. But like I said, what is kept in darkness will continue to manifest and grow and consume you. But when it's exposed to light, it has no power, and that fear has no grip on you. And so that was one of the biggest lessons that I had taken away from my own transformational journey. And now I was able to empower this beautiful soul and give her a key to her own freedom. And so that was the summer of 2018. And then just a few short months later, I found myself alone in an Airbnb back in LA. And it was just me and my journal. And I started writing. And at this time, I was just asking myself, what was next? I wanted to know where I was being called and led to. Now, mind you, I was out in LA for another women's event, and I was taking the stage once again for another women's empowerment community that I was a part of. And so I was asking, what do I do with this newfound sense of self-worth, self-love, and wisdom, and this identity of who I am in the season and who I'm still continuing to become? And I wrote that in a journal, and I just wanted to create a safe space for women to be seen, to be heard, to be known, and to be validated, where they could just stop performing and stop proving and perfecting and just stop carrying everything alone because it wasn't required of them anymore. And as I'm writing this down, I remember I picked my head up and thought about that and how powerful that would be. And then I hear this voice, loud as day, the confident woman. And so I wrote it down right there in my journal. And I remember coming home from LA completely just lit. I was turning it over and over in my mind, knowing that this was a direction. I don't know what direction, but it was something that my mind now had something to chew on. And as podcasts 7 years ago they were still relatively new. They were becoming a thing. People were still listening to podcasts, but they weren't what they are today, where there's a million podcasts, like literally millions of podcasts. And I had been listening to one with just two women that were just being real and having these conversations. And I thought, well, what if I could do that? What if I could create that kind of space where we could talk about the things of interest, the things that I'm going through, the things that I'm being called to, the things that are happening in my own community, the things that real women are sharing. And it's this courageous vulnerability that these women are showing up. And what if we can have those deep, meaningful conversations? What would that kind of space look like and feel like? And as I'm mulling this over, one thing I knew for certain was I did not want to have a monologue. I did not want to talk by myself, to myself, for myself, none of that. Because what good is a conversation when it's one sided, right? And so for a conversation to happen, it had to be a dialogue. And so I turned that back over to God and I prayed about it. And I thought about who would I want to have these conversations with? Who could I invite in and share this experience with? And so I reached out to somebody and I asked her, she had said yes. And then we began planning. And then in the early months of 2019, she changed her mind and walked away. And that could really sting because you had this whole plan, but the things that wasn't God's plan, right? Sometimes that's God's protection working before you could see it. And so I went back to my journal, and this is where God shows off. This is wild. So I opened my notebook and started writing again, because doing that was something I always did, right? Declaring things as if they had already happened. And I wrote down the name of this individual that I had the utmost respect for, that I absolutely loved and trusted. And we just always had such great dynamic and chemistry, especially with our conversations. And I wanted to build this with them. And this woman was truly my friend. She was somebody I had to come to trust. And we always had just great dynamic. Conversations were just constantly flowing, never a moment of silence. And we just pinged off of each other. And then I reached out to her just as we used to always catch up and grab coffee and connect. And so I reached out and said, hey, you want to grab some coffee? She says, yes. And there we were, just two friends catching up. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I found out that person had planned to start a podcast with someone else who had also just walked away. It was wild. And so we looked at each other and I said, do you want to do this with me? And she said, yes. And so we shook hands right there. And then as I was opening my notebook to talk about the big vision and the plans and the things that I had already set in motion, I opened the notebook and there it was. Her name was on the page from weeks before. And I honestly forgot that I even wrote that. I had forgot. I just thought it was a thought in my head, not an actual written thought. But there it was, written right in front of me. And I said to her, you were supposed to be here this entire time. This is wild. And then, let me tell you, because God's not done yet, right around the corner at the same time, someone she had never met before, crossed paths with, they were in the area and said, hey, if you don't mind, I met this person online and they're going to pop in and they just want to meet and connect. And I was just like, okay, cool. So here we are just having our coffee, beaming from ear to ear that this thing is now set in motion. We're super excited. And then in walks this person and just tells us about he owns a recording studio down the street and we're free to use it at any time. And she has said, we literally just agreed that we're going to do this podcast. And it was so incredible. And so all these open doors were just opening. And it was just God orchestrating and aligning and moving parts and pieces, which was incredible. And so when I look at this and I say, well, how did all of this fall apart and then fall into place like that? Only God, right? That is God ordained and orchestrated. Every single piece of it, including the parts that fell apart. Because that's the part that a falling apart made room for what was actually meant to be there. And so we begin recording our first episode early 2019, batching them so we could launch and get ready and have everything all set. Because when you start a podcast, you batch record a bunch of your content. And then when you launch it, you tell people about it and you want it to be like binge worthy. How many of us are on Netflix? And if you had to watch one episode, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so good. Now you got to wait, right? Like that waiting sucks, and the momentum and the everything that we've already built up, right? So batch record your content, launch, give people all types of episodes so they can binge on this and get the excitement. So by the time they get through the binge worthy content, you're ready for the next week or whatever your cadence is. And so I remember we batched all this, and I was super excited because we had a launch date, which was May 22nd, 2019. And that was the launch date of the Confident Woman podcast. And what's even cooler, and I'm such a geek about like dates and anniversaries and significance of all that stuff, is on May 23rd is my wedding anniversary. And so 2019, the day after May 22nd, my anniversary being May 23rd of 2019, was me celebrating my 10-year anniversary in Maui with my husband, which was like the most magical 10-year anniversary. And it was incredible. And I'm still beaming from the podcast launch. And then the next day was my anniversary. And it was just like, only God, this was amazing. And so I remember thinking, I'm literally living my best life. I am high off of all of this because, mind you, I had just started to reclaim my life. I didn't even know what life and living and loving and all that stuff really was until I started healing. And that was that journey that I had embarked on, that God took me through some very dark seasons and dark roads and all this darkness to come to the light, so that now I can appreciate and feel free and light and live and all the incredible gifts and glory that God has to offer. And it's just beautiful. That was the very first time in my life. And so the timing of it, launching something like this so significant from a place of pure joy and gratitude, from a place, a physical place, which is like paradise, it's Maui, from the other side of the country, and from the other side of so much darkness and shame and the years of hiding, is something I will never, ever take for granted. And so we end up recording everything all the way up until COVID hits in 2020. We were using that studio and it was perfect. And then we moved on to Zoom. But what we didn't realize is that the changes and the transitions were all setting us up for success. So we adapted, we started bringing in guests, and we kept building because we couldn't bring guests beyond just our local community into a recording studio. We were still so new. But when we opened up Zoom on the World Wide Web, what did we get? Worldwide women. Women from all over the world were listening to this podcast. Women from all over the world were asking to be guests on our show. Women from all over the world were taking that first next step to share their story, to go first, to be vulnerable, to have these conversations. And it was just the beginning. And so there was this real friendship in all of this, and this real purpose, and these real conversations that were just like none other. And as we continue to build and grow, as life does, it leads us into different directions. And so at the time, unfortunately, my co-host, in that season, it ran its course. Our last episode left the door open for whatever may happen, whatever God willing will happen. And that was bittersweet. And I entrusted that God will continue to pave the way, as he always has and always has done. And so now here I was, for the first time, having to do the very thing I said I never wanted to do, which was talk by myself, have the monologue that I was so afraid of. And I was nervous and I was fearful. And to be honest with you, I thought about shutting down this whole thing because I didn't want to do it. I was scared. I was just like, the very thing that I said I didn't want to do, now I'm forced to do it and I don't want to do it, kicking and screaming. And I truly believe that what I was doing, even though I couldn't see where it was going, he did. And so I did not quit. I kept doing it and I fumbled my way. We have a podcast, The Confident Woman, and the confident woman was not so very confident, but that thing happens. So in 2024, After a, an incredible retreat I attended, I remember coming back because something changed within me. And I remember thinking about the audience, and for me to show up as my best self and to my highest calling and continue the works that God has already begun in me, I remember that I wanted to have faith fueled conversations. I wanted to always have Christ at the center. And that could be from our values aligned to testimonies, to experiences, to walks, to God ordained and orchestrated stories, to whatever, however. God is always in the story, right? He's always in the mix of it. And so when I came back, I was just ready to just stop performing, stop trying to do this on my own and be so scared. And I think that was what was interesting, is because I started having these real, raw, honest conversations about my faith, about my life, and my actual story. And that's when the podcast became something completely different. But, and when I say completely different, we were still podcasting at the heart of it all. The heart and the soul had never changed. It just got bigger. It got more intentional. It got more faith fueled, and it was beautiful. And so that was just, again, showing up, being real, being raw. And then in January of 2025, the one day I could never, ever have planned, predicted, or been prepared for was the tragic and traumatic passing of my father. The loss, which is devastating, and it still ripples through me every single day. And that had been something, again, where not only was I radically changed, but I had to change who I was becoming in this season. But what was so cool about what God, again, God is in this whole story. Like I said, this is all about him. What was so cool was, because the podcast was growing at an exponential speed, all of the guests that I had on in 2024, when we start batching, and like I said, batch record your content, because you never know what life is going to deal you. I was prepared from a place of guests. I had been able to take the entire year of 2025 off from guest episodes, but you'd never know that if you look back, right? God knew, I didn't. So what was the one thing I had to do in 2025, and I committed to this. I could have had a different plan, but God led me to this. And as I said, when I open my mouth, put the words in it, fill me with your spirit. So in 2024, I had guests lined up that brought me in and carried me all the way through 2025. And I never had to put out any other guest related content. The only thing I had to do was show up every single month. I was having real time, real raw, honest conversations of me, solo episodes, just walking through grief in real time, sharing what I was learning, what I was holding on to, what I was still trying to figure out, what I was processing out loud sometimes in real time. Sometimes I would just open the mic and just ramble. So forgive me if it was a little bit ADHD. That's just my brain. But it was just me having to do the thing that I never thought I wanted to do. But you have no idea how transformative and healing it was to share these episodes, to navigate this with you, to show up in spaces and places I didn't think that I even was worthy to have a seat at. But I have built this platform with God, and we all have this seat because we are all worthy of taking up that space. And so when I started sharing all of these things, in a way, that season had brought me back to the very reason this podcast started in the first place. And that's so cool. So here we are now, 7 years in, 375 episodes of showing up every single week, building something without a blueprint, without certainty, without a plan, without knowing, without perfecting and doing all the things that would prevent us from even starting in the first place. We just go. We just take action. We seek with the Holy Spirit, and we move when He tells us to move. We ask when He tells us to ask. We have this God confidence. The confident woman is she. She's me. She's you. She's all of us. Because when we have a God-sized confidence, we become unstoppable. And so when I ask myself, like I said at the beginning, if I did what I was supposed to do with this, I still don't have the clear answer. But what I do know is that I started this because I needed it for me back then. I needed the space. I needed the conversation. And I needed to be seen and heard and known. And I knew that other women needed that too. And so if you're holding on to something and you're wondering when the perfect time is, or if you're holding on to it because God called you to it, delay is disobedience. Take the first next step. Unperfect, unpolished, unprepared. Just take action and do. Because faith without works is dead. And so is that dream that God has put in your heart. Show up and take action. Fast forward all this, bring it to full close here, is I remember somebody had asked me if I teach confidence. To which I looked at them and said, no, I don't. And they looked at me curiously and they said, but you're the founder of The Confident Woman. You have the Confident Woman podcast. I said, you can't teach confidence just like you can't teach love. It has to be shown. It has to be lived, and it has to be demonstrated through actual experience. Confidence comes by showing up, but putting in the reps, doing the work. And what I've come to understand over 7 years is that consistency compounded over time yields results. So you don't have to have it all figured out to keep showing up. And God doesn't need you to have it all together before He can use what you're building. He just needs your yes. He needs your obedience. And so if you're sitting on something right now, something you've heard loud as day, or that quiet little whisper, but talked yourself out of it. But if you haven't moved toward it yet, I want you to hear this. The part that's supposed to fall apart will. And what was actually meant to be will come together in ways you could never have scripted from wherever you are standing at today. Because God will always work things out for His good and His glory. If you are at that crossroad and you're trying to figure out where He's leading you, where He's calling you into this version of your becoming, into your season, I invite you to check out the I Am Enough Identity Reset. It's a free 10-minute reset that's exactly for these kinds of moments when you need to pause, get honest about where you've been, what you've been believing, and come back to what's actually true. You can click the links in the show notes below and grab your free copy. So until next time, take care and God bless.
Hey there, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Confident Woman podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Thanks again for listening.